Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Property Talk with y'all. And the reason I have such a stupid smile on my face right now is because I'm guilty. And I know how long it's been since I've posted on YouTube. I think it's been between 4 to 5 months since I last posted a video, but I am back. And I'm so excited to share with you guys some of the content I've been working on, not just for YouTube, but just for my Property Talk with Y'all's brand in general. So please make sure you follow me on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter as well. All my handles are in the description box below. And yeah, just follow me on all those social media platforms to make sure you don't miss all my other property content as well. So I thought I should start with something that's very close to home. As you guys can see from the title of the video, I've actually titled it Property Mgowo because your girl has been going through the most. Not just with one, but both of my rental properties. Now, let me tell you something. Combined, I've been renting out those 2 rental properties for a total of about 4 years. And I promise you, for those 4 years, I have not had any issues in terms of occupancy. So both of my rental properties have been occupied all the time. I've always had a tenant and I was receiving rental income guaranteed every month, right? And secondly, I've never had any issues with any of my tenants not paying, damaging properties, like no issues whatsoever. So I was really spoiled actually. But God said, girl, this year you are going to learn. And boy, I had to learn the hard way. And let me tell you something else. You know, if you are a property investor and you actually know what it is that you are doing, you will know that things will go wrong on the journey. You know that you'll have tenant problems. You'll know that you'll have occupancy problems. You know, there's no way you can have an investment property for 20 years and expect the whole 20 years to be smooth sailing. Something will go wrong, right? So if you know what you're doing, you prepare for things like this to happen. But let me tell you, when it does actually happen, it's quite a bitter pill to swallow, okay? It is definitely not a nice feeling. It's kind of like having an emergency fund, right? You know it's there for rainy days, but you hope the rainy days never come. And when they do come, you're kind of like, I wish I had an emergency fund for my emergency fund, you know? And that's exactly the case. When it hits you, it's kind of like, I knew it was coming, but why? You know, why did it happen to me? And I literally found myself in a situation like that. And I think to make matters worse, as I mentioned, it wasn't just one, but actually with both of my properties. So we'll call them Property A and Property B. So let's start with Property A. What went wrong with Property A? So it was nearing the end of the lease agreement for my current tenant, for the tenant in that property at that time. And normally what I do about 2 months before the lease ends, I will send an email to my tenant just asking, hey, you know, your lease is ending in 2 months. Do you have any plans to renew it for another year? And the reason I do this 2 months in advance is that if the tenant, you know, decides to not renew the lease, then at least I know I have given myself enough time to find a new tenant, right, to replace them. So I reached out to my current tenant and they came back to say, hey, I'm actually looking for a bigger place. So I won't be extending the lease. I will be occupying this flat until the end of June. And I was like, okay, cool. That's great. Thanks for letting me know. And I started my journey of looking for another tenant. So a couple of weeks went by and I wasn't getting any feedback from any of the agents, right? At this point, I wasn't really worried because remember, I had given myself at least 2 months to find someone. And they were telling me, no, you know, it's a bit quiet at the moment, but as we get closer to the occupancy date, you know, people will show interest and they will come for viewing. So I was like, okay, cool, you know, do your thing. I trust y'all. It's okay. So then, a couple more weeks went by and still there was literally nothing, right? No one was showing interest. No one wanted to view the apartment. And I couldn't understand why, right? Because if you guys have been following me or watched my other videos, you will know that apartment A is actually situated in Waterfall, right? Which is an area filled with lots of development, lots of potential, high demand. People in Joburg want to stay in Waterfall. So I was a bit confused. And I didn't understand, why no one was showing any interest. To cut the long story short, the day finally came for the current tenant in apartment A to move out, and I literally did not have a tenant to replace them. So for the first time ever in about 4 years, I was sitting with a vacant flat. Vacant meaning that I was not going to get rental income for that month. Guys, I was devastated. I was devastated to see my flat empty and not occupied for the first time. It hit me hard. And as I said before, I knew that things like this would happen. I knew that something like this would happen. But when it does happen, it just hits you so hard. So let's just track back and maybe try to understand how did a situation like this happen. The most obvious one is probably COVID. COVID has definitely had an impact on the property rental landscape, and if you are a landlord, you have probably been affected by COVID one way or another, right? And it's a whole domino effect, because we know that people lost their jobs, other people got salary cuts, and therefore they've had to reduce their standard of living. Then the second factor, as I had mentioned before, there's a lot of development happening in Waterfall, right? People are saying it's the next Sandton or the next Four Ways, but they are building malls, they are building more shopping centers, as well as property developments, right? And at a first glance, this might seem like a good thing because, the more property develop or the more development there is, obviously, this will affect the value of your own property in that area. But then again, if you look at it from another angle, right? If they're building other property developments, this is competition for you. And that's exactly what happened in Waterfall. So they were building a new, better, bigger development next to my current property complex. And they actually had bigger one bedrooms at a slightly reduced price, right? And as I said, this development was more attractive because it just had better amenities as well inside the complex, right? So now, even if there is a high demand into the area, people are choosing to go into the new complex, right? And this is now competition that you did not anticipate, which makes things a little harder. Now the question becomes, with this new competition, with competitive prices as well, with rental prices, how do I make my apartment stand out? What do I have to do, right, to make it attractive for someone to rent my apartment? And as painful as it was having a vacant property and not having a tenant, and not receiving rental income, I did use that time to actually add some extras into my apartment, paint the walls a different color just to make it different, and just to make it more attractive to potential tenants. So that is property one, right? It's vacant. I'm doing what I can. It's on the market. My agents are working very hard and I'm just crossing fingers. Then we move on to property B. There was A and B. Property B. So with property B, what happened is that, I got a text from my tenant telling me that they have been struggling to find employment and basically they just can't afford to pay rent for that particular month. Okay, and as I mentioned before, guys, of course we know the effects, that COVID has had on people's employments. And I literally, found myself where I was in a situation where I was trying to be empathetic and understand this person's situation, but also at the same time realize that I am running a business, right? I am running a business, and when I don't get any rental income, that affects my cash flow, that affects my numbers. And you can prepare for a situation like this, but when it does happen, and your tenant is begging and they are pleading with you, and they are trying to get in touch with your human side, it is so difficult. Someone actually once said to me that if you don't have a tough skin, then maybe property investing is not for you. If you don't have a tough skin and you don't know how to deal with tenants in an empathetic, so you don't have to be sympathetic with them. Be empathetic, but also have a tough skin and understand that you're running a business. If you aren't able to do that, then maybe property investing is not for you, because I promise you, times like that will come. So I was in two situations. One, a vacant flat. Two, a tenant who had lost their job, couldn't find a new job, and it had come to a point where they couldn't afford to pay rent. Shoo! Yeah, so pretty much every landlord's worst nightmare. And I just wanted us to quickly talk about what do you do to prepare for a situation like this, and when you find yourself in these situations, what it is that you can do to make the situation better or to help prepare yourself to resolve the situation. The first thing that comes to mind is an emergency fund. Finance 101, right? Even if you don't own any property, guys, you need to have an emergency fund. And if you are a property investor and you own properties and you're renting them out, it becomes even more critical for you to have an emergency fund. Why? Because as property investors, we know what we're doing, right? And we know that something like this is bound to happen. It's not in your control. It is bound to happen, right? There are ways to mitigate, prepare for these risks, because remember, owning property at the end of the day is a risk. Owning an asset is a risk, right? And the idea is that you need to be able to prepare for these risks so that when they do happen, it doesn't become a burden onto you. So if, for example, apartment A, rental is 8,000 Rand, you want to have at least 3 to 6 months of that rental income, right? So minimum 24,000, max 48,000 in an emergency fund. So that's the first one, right? And I think maybe a second one is just keep calm, keep calm and be patient. This is something that I had to remind myself over and over again, Yolanda, that's why you have an emergency fund, right? For situations like this. And instead of spending time, on panicking, and worrying, rather use that energy to find a solution to resolve the problem, right? This is a risk that you have prepared for. Now that the risk has arrived, just keep calm and let's find a solution. If you are dealing with a vacant property, consider lowering the price of rental. So, you need to know what's happening in the area, what's happening in the neighborhood, and make sure that the price of your rental property is not overpriced compared to similar, houses or apartments in the area, right? You might also want to look at, adding some extras into your apartment, just to increase the value of your apartment and make it stand out from the rest, which is very, very important. Specifically if you are in a complex that has a lot of apartments and they all look the same, Besides price, what else is going to make your apartment stand out from the rest? If you're having difficulties, with a tenant that won't pay rent, it could be a situation where they just refuse to pay rent, or they've lost their job and they can't afford to pay rent anymore. a good start, I mean, the reason why the tenant can't pay rent doesn't really matter. If you view your property as a business, the end goal or the end issue here, or the main issue here is that they can't pay rent, right? And a good starting point is the lease agreement. What does the lease agreement say? In a case when the tenant can't fulfill the agreement in the lease and they can't pay rent, what have you stipulated there? Remember, this is a document that the tenant would have read, the tenant would have signed, which means that they are aware of the consequences of not paying rent on that property, right? So that's a good starting point. As difficult as it might be, yeah, I mean, this was my first experience dealing with the tenant and being in this situation. And because I manage my properties myself, sometimes I will get help from an agent, like to find me a new tenant, or I will reach out to maybe a lawyer to assist me with something. But in general, I handle and I manage the properties myself, which means I'm the one that has to deal with the tenants directly. Basically, it's not an easy process. The law does tend to protect the tenant in this situation, but as a landlord, make sure it is clearly stipulated in your lease agreement, what the consequences are, and what action you will need to take in a situation where your tenant cannot pay for rent. And that makes things a lot easier for you. And as I said, get professionals, people who understand how the process works and what to do, get them involved and get them to help you. So to conclude, for apartment A, that apartment was vacant for a total of 6 weeks, so a month and a half. And eventually I was able to get a tenant in. So very happy with that. However, I did have to reduce my rental price, which then obviously affects my total cash flow. But I think that's a result of COVID. Rental prices in the area have gone down, and unfortunately, I've had to adapt as well. Hopefully, soon we can recover and we'll be back on the upward trend. And then with apartment B, this is a situation that I'm still currently in. Still trying to find, the best solution. I am, at this moment, currently looking for a new tenant to move into that apartment. And then, still trying to figure out the best way to handle the situation with the current tenant. So yeah, that's it for me today. I thought I would just, restart my YouTube journey with a more of a personal story, something that all of you guys can relate to as property investors. And if you don't yet own a property or are planning to get a rental property, then something for you to consider and think about as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you haven't, please do subscribe to the channel. And yeah, let's grow this community of property investors. Thank you very much, guys. See you in the next video. Bye.